We have one of the world's, if not the world's oldest, aquaculture system. There are a number of fish traps around the world that are older than this. Of that there's no doubt, but this is a system for farming eels.
It's looking good, it's looking good. It'll stand, put it that way, right?
Ian, Wally the Waller Carline, is holding a masterclass in his chosen craft.
Lengthways in, length for strength, right? And you pack it before you stack it. So if you remember that, you won't go far wrong, okay?
These enthusiastic amateurs have actually paid to spend a warm and windy weekend lugging and chipping away at rock,
You have to make the stone work for you.
while learning about the finer points of dry stone construction.
See what he's doing? He's doing nothing, is he, really? Can I borrow your hammer a minute? Just take that bit off.
It's a sign of a rekindled fascination in this most ancient of building methods.
It looks as though it's in a funny place. It's miles from anywhere anybody would normally go, but it has immense attraction for me every time I come past here. I admire it, and I'm grateful for the effort that all of you people and others before you have put into it. Come behind. Come behind. Yeah.
Angus McLaughlin's predecessors on his mother's side took up this country in the eastern Adelaide Hills in 1843.
Hello.
It was a landscape with few trees, but well endowed with stone. It still is. Riding high on the back of the success of wool, the Melrose family built a magnificent home here. And a shearing shed, now heritage listed. And boundary fences and sheep yards, all from the local stone.
Roy, come behind here. Solo here.
Theirs is a typical tale. In the days before pastoral leases, sheep ran free on fenceless plains and shepherds were employed to look after the large flocks. But in the 1850s, just as landholders started gaining permanent tenure, gold was discovered in Victoria. Many lonely and lowly paid shepherds left to make their fortunes in the goldfields.
So the pastorals were left with the need to build fences. The people up the top end are complaining they're not getting the good stone. People down the bottom are pinching it all. I've got to be nice to them.
Bruce Munday is a doctor of physics, a farmer and a dry stone wall devotee.
I'm full of admiration for what people can do with their hands and lumps of stone.
So much so, he wrote a book on the subject, with his wife Kristen taking the photos.
For me, it was not so much about the stone walls, but the life in those times. What prompted people to build them? How did they build them? What skills did they need? How long did it take? What were they paid? All those sort of questions came together and made a story, which then became a book. I thought I'll probably get rid of about 50 copies to friends and relatives, and that'll be about the end of it. But the book has been reprinted, of course.
It was his idea to establish workshops for those eager to learn how to build and repair walls. He approached Angus McLaughlin, and so began the arduous repairs on the wall to nowhere.
The old fencing had deteriorated and the wall was there, but some plantation trees nearby fell on it. People hunting foxes, jumping horses over it, damaged the tops, and so it started to fall into disrepair. Bruce Munday, who wrote the book that started all this, was pretty keen to rebuild part of it just as a workshop to show people how it can be done. And so with Wally and others, he's been rebuilding it.
I left school when I was 14 and worked on this farm, and the old guy, he was mad on dry stone walling because he got a family of masons. You know, like his dad was a mason, his dad was a mason, it sort of went down the line, you know. And he taught me how to do this dry work.
As you may have picked, Ian, who is always known as Wally, spent his formative years in England, Derbyshire to be precise. He's a master waller, and barely draws breath as he passes on his accumulated knowledge.
That stone sits onto there, right? Your weight will press on from above. It'll stop any of these moving, bellying out.
Yes.
But if you were to put him like that,
Oh, yes, of course.
and then you put another one here like that, fill all your middle in, that's what he's going to do.
Yes, yeah.
And eventually the weight's going to push him out.
Yes.
And especially if he's down there in the bottom of your wall. So
good.
he's got to be like that.
Where walls were once considered a purely practical solution, now they're viewed as an aesthetic feature in the landscape. And every wall has its own story. In the southern states, including Tasmania, dry stone walls cut across farm paddocks. They skirt the edges of roads that were once merely wagon tracks. And in some cases, they still form a useful barrier to keep stock in. They were built without any mortar. That's the definition of a dry stone wall. Sometimes they were the handiwork of farmers, in very few cases of convicts. But mostly they were the paid projects of skilled wallers who'd been brought out from England, Ireland or Scotland in the middle of the 19th century.
They were craftsmen, and so a lot of these stations would have their own blacksmith, their own cobbler, their own saddler, and they'd have their own wallers.
The walls had a dual purpose: to rid paddocks and pasture of troublesome rock, and to draw boundaries in an era when pastoralists were staking their claims. There are many impressive structures that are still standing more than 150 years later.
But this one is believed to be the longest continuous construction. Starting here near Farrell Flat in South Australia's mid-north, the Camel Hump defines the boundary between Hill River and Gum Creek stations and stretches north across the ridges and valleys an astonishing 65 kilometres.
Built in the 1850s, Bruce Munday says this wall was the work of many men over many years.
Most of them came out with their skills from the UK and also from Germany, but the walls up through the mid-north were mainly built by Irishmen. Patrick O'Grady was one who was very significant in helping build the Camel Hump Wall, which is the longest single dry stone wall in Australia, to my knowledge. It goes from Farrell Flat to Booberaowie. A monumental piece of civil engineering.
While the focus has been on dry stone walls built over the past 2 centuries, there is in fact evidence of stone wall constructions going back long before European settlement in Australia. This is known as the Budge Bim lava flow area in southwestern Victoria, and it is very rocky.
The remnants of hundreds of stone huts tells us the Gunditj Mara people were not nomadic.
Yeah, we have the remains of a stone house that was built on here.
Dennis Rose has been deeply involved in the scientific evaluation of ancient stone structures on country.
As you can see, it's a 3/4 circle with an opening on the generally facing the east, away from the prevailing winds. The walls were usually about 1 metre or so high, the stone walls, and then the roof was either packed flat with branches and mud, or sometimes teepee-like to have a taller roof.
In 2007, the Gunditj Mara people had their native title rights recognised. They went on to acquire a number of properties along the lava flow. Around 3,000 hectares of land in the region is now Aboriginal owned and boasts the most remarkable specimens of both European and Indigenous dry stone constructions. In the days when sheep would be washed before they were shorn, the animals were pushed through the extraordinary Bessie Bell sheep wash. Men would stand waist high in water cleaning the wool. Set well back in farmland on the natural watercourse, few Australians would ever have heard of, let alone seen the structure built with European and Aboriginal labour between 1850 and 1864. Several millennia before the giant sheep wash was thought up, the Indigenous people were building fish farms in this region, also out of stone.
We have one of the world's, if not the world's oldest aquaculture system. There are a number of fish traps around the world that are older than this. Of that there's no doubt, but this is a system for farming eels. We're in the middle of the fish trap system here, where the channel has been constructed, as you can see here, and up further you can see the funnel of rocks that divert the eels into and the water into this part here. When it was time to harvest the eels, we'd go and get an eel net, an eel basket made out of the local grasses, and remove a few rocks out of the little weir, put the basket in, grab the required number of eels. Once you had enough there, you'd put the rocks back in and there off you go with your dinner.
The land manager with the Gunditj Meering Aboriginal Corporation says the group wants World Heritage listing for the region. An archaeologist, Professor Ian McNiven, has led the research. His work has been peer-reviewed and, coupled with old maps and traditional Indigenous knowledge, the value of the stone sites is gradually becoming accepted.
We've got a cultural heritage that is expressed in dry stone construction that speaks of well before Europeans came to this continent, and maybe 5,000 or 6,000 years old. It's quite extraordinary.
It's one of those secrets that are a bit too well kept, I suppose, but we are involved in tourism and we do want to get people out on country a bit more and have access to properties to get a better understanding of Gunditj Mara culture. Continuing down the system.